Bhagavad-gita ki jai. Om Premanande. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So, last time I spoke here, I think only a little over a month ago, and I remember in a text message from Aditya Narayan Guru, he had asked me to include in my talk some memories of Srila Prabhupada, but I didn't obey his instructions. The class went on and I just fixed in his presence. I'm going to try to be more obedient and share some of my early memories, which I love to do and I know devotees generally love to hear. So I was thinking, because I was only informed yesterday that I would be giving the class, so I was thinking, let me speak on the verse which has had the greatest amount of impact on me over the last, half a century or so that I've been practicing Krishna consciousness. I had to think for some time which that verse might be. And I think that the one that I've chosen is the one, and I'll explain why, but we'll start with the verse. This is a very, very important verse, one of the Chaturshloki verses of the Bhagavad-gita. It's chapter 10, verse 10. And we will start with the Sanskrit, and then we'll read the translation, and then I'll read the purport, and then we can discuss. Tesham satata yuktanam Tesham satata yuktanam Bhajatam pritipurvakam Bhajatam pritipurvakam Dadami buddhiyogam tam Dadami buddhiyogam tam Yena mam upayanti te Tesham satata yuktanam Bhajatam pritipurvakam Dadami buddhiyogam tam Yena mam upayanti te. Now the translation, Tesham, unto them, Satata yuktanam, always engaged, Bhajatam, in rendering devotional service, Pritipurvakam, in loving ecstasy, Dadami, I give, Buddhiyogam, real intelligence, Tam, that, Yena, by which, Mam, unto me, Upayanti, come, Te, they. Translation, to those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. Please repeat. To those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. This is Srila Prabhupada's purport. In this verse, the word Buddhi Yogam is very significant. We may remember that in the second chapter, the Lord, instructing Arjuna, said that he had spoken to him of many things and that he would instruct him in the way of Buddhi Yoga. Now, Buddhi Yoga is explained. Buddhi Yoga itself is action in Krishna consciousness. That is the highest intelligence. Buddhi means intelligence, and yoga means mystic activity or mystic elevation. When one tries to go back home, back to Godhead, and takes fully to Krishna consciousness in devotional service, his action is called Buddhi Yoga. In other words, Buddhi Yoga is a process by which one gets out of the entanglement of this material world. The ultimate goal of progress is Krishna. Therefore, the association of devotees by a spiritual master are important. One should know that the goal is Krishna. And when the goal is assigned, then the path is slowly but progressively traversed, and ultimately the goal is achieved. When a person knows the goal of life but is addicted to the fruits of activities, he is acting in karma yoga. When he knows that the goal is Krishna, but he takes pleasure in mental speculations to understand Krishna, he is acting in jnana yoga. And when he knows the goal and seeks Krishna completely in Krishna consciousness and devotional service, he is acting in bhakti yoga or buddha yoga, which is the complete yoga. This complete yoga is the highest perfectional stage of life. A person may have a bona fide spiritual master and may be attached to a spiritual organization, but if he is still not intelligent enough to make progress, then Krishna from within gives him instructions so that he may ultimately come to him without difficulty. The qualification is that a person always engage himself in Krishna consciousness with love and devotion and render all kinds of services. He should perform some sort of work for Krishna, and that work should be with love. If a devotee is not intelligent enough to make progress on this path of self-realization, but is sincere and devoted to the activities of devotional service, the Lord gives him a chance to make progress and ultimately to obtain him. Om Agyanat Marantasya Kinanjana Salakaya Chaksunmritam Vena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Vena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Svavadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Thapada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Sat Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Vanatam Vidantam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadhutam Parijanasahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhavitam Shah He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindaveshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyadya Deshatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaurabhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So this verse from very early days of my involvement in Krishna consciousness gave me great hope. Because in this verse, Krishna makes it very clear one thing that we know from the basic ABCs of philosophy, that Krishna resides within the heart as Paramatma. That we know. But here Krishna explains that he who is situated within the heart gives direction and gives intelligence to one who's engaged in the process of devotional service. So one thing I was very aware of, very much intelligence. This was a major defect in my case, that I always wanted to understand why I was in this world, and I had no idea. So I thought, this must be because I don't have very much intelligence, I cannot figure out. And the more I thought about it, the more confused I would become. I remember once at the age of 14, lying in a bunk bed looking out of a window and seeing the stars in the sky. This is in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and you could see billions of stars, and wondering, where do I fit in with this galaxy of stars and planets, these luminaries? Where do they end? How far does it go? And what's beyond what I can see, and what's beyond that which is beyond what I can see? And where did it all come from? Is there something behind it? Is there someone behind it? So then, after many years of questioning and reading many speculations on the matter, I encountered the devotees of Krishna, and I received the Bhagavad-gita. And all these questions were all of a sudden answered. And I thought, wow, maybe my search doesn't require my intelligence alone. What a great relief. Because I wasn't getting very far. As a matter of fact, the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. But Krishna gives the intelligence, because Krishna is the intelligence. And Krishna is sitting side by side the Jiva as Paramatma. He's sitting alongside of the Jivatma, and he's there to give directions whenever that Jiva is ready. So the perfect analogy is given in Shastra is two birds in a tree. One bird is tasting the fruits, and the other one is witnessing. The witness is Krishna within the heart. Chaita Guru is a guru within the heart, our original guru. And he is there giving the directions when we are ready to receive. But as long as we're busy tasting the fruits of the tree, we may be so distracted that we don't even notice that he's there. But once we become confused enough, or despondent enough, depressed enough, or anxious enough to understand that which cannot be understood by the mind, we may stop and pause and think. And then, at that time, Krishna will give direction. So I was in that state of mind in San Francisco, 1967. Actually, it was 66, but I think it was not until 1967 that I encountered the devotees of Krishna. And I thought, where did these angels come from? They were so amazing. They would walk up and down the streets chanting Hare Krishna, and I was just fascinated. And I would always approach them and take a Bhagavad-gita, because that's all there was at the time. And I would give a donation, and I'd take the Bhagavad-gita, Back to Godhead magazine. And I would take the magazine home, I would read it cover to cover, and those early Back to Godhead magazines always had menus, and the description how to offer the food to Krishna. And so I would study those menus, and I would try in my little apartment to cook something. And then I would take the magazine and lean it against the wall, showing a picture of Krishna, and try to make an offering following the directions. So this was the beginning, and little by little, Krishna was giving intelligence. And there's a portion of this purport that I'm going to reread, because it's a description of me perfectly. And that is that a person may have a bona fide spiritual master and may be attached to a spiritual organization, as I have been for many, many years. But if he's still not intelligent enough to make progress, then Krishna from within gives him instructions so that he may ultimately come to him without difficulty. Oh, what great solace I get from reading those lines. Because I know that Krishna is in my heart. I have a conviction. And I know that by following this process, however gradual it may be, it doesn't matter. I may be on the caboose, and someone else may be in the engine room. They may be far ahead of me, but we're on the same track, we're in the same train, and we're going to the same place. So I'm happy to be where I am. And I also, one of my heroes, one of the great heroes of all of us, is Sri Raghunath Das Goswami, who, putting his head to the ground 3,000 times a day minimum. He was the emblem of humility. Raghunath Das Goswami, one of the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan and a direct disciple of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, would offer 2,000 times a day his obeisances to his deity. And 2,000 times a day to the Vaishnavas, and 1,000 times a day to his deity. And I think of him also often. And I think that there aren't too many times that we should put our head to the floor. Actually, Srila Prabhupada said that if we don't offer our obeisances now, we will ultimately offer our obeisances at the time of death. So why not get used to it beforehand, rather than waiting until we're forced? And we do it with consciousness, rather than doing it in a state of bewilderment. With consciousness that we are a mere fragment. Mamadhamso Jivaloki, Jivakuta Sanatana. We are a small fragment of the personality of Godhead. And the more we can humble ourselves and realize our fragmentary position, the more we become eligible to understand Krishna's infinite greatness. This is the science of Krishna consciousness. The smaller we become, the more we can realize. The more capacity we have to gain knowledge, the smaller we become. So we want to become small, and how do we become small? So this whole process of Krishna consciousness is the process of service, process of serving the devotees, and serving the pure devotee and the pure devotee's instructions, and assisting other devotees in the service to the pure devotee, and assisting those devotees who are assisting those devotees in this way. In one of the first lectures I ever heard Srila Prabhupada gave, he made a beautiful gesture. He raised his finger in the air and he says, and the further down the line of service you go, the sweeter that service becomes. So we want to become the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant. Das anu das anu das. This is the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. You cannot become too humble. You cannot become humble enough. Because through humility, we gain our true attachment to the Lord and to His devotees. And so this is the process. So when I was in 1969, after I had left San Francisco, I did not join the temple there. I was very, very attracted to Krishna consciousness, but the ego was too big. I had not yet chiseled away at that big ego. I was too independent. I was too much having a sense of control. Gradually, I realized that I don't have really any control to speak of. I mean, a little bit, minute. Krishna gives us minute independence, it is said. So in that sense, we have minute control. Basically, we don't have control over our activities. We have control over our desires to a certain degree, because it's our desires that control our activities. Our activities follow our desires. And there is a very important verse in the third chapter of the Bhagavad-gita. It says, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha ahamkara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. So the bewildered soul, thinking himself to be the doer of activities, is not the doer at all. These activities are actually carried out by nature. But the bewildered soul who's under the influence of that nature, the three modes of material nature, thinks himself to be the doer, but is not at all. So this is one stage of liberation, is realizing that we are not the controllers and we're not the doers, that everything is being done by Krishna. Because Krishna is the controller of the modes of nature. And if he's the controller of the modes of nature, and we can submit to his control, then with his help, indirectly, we become the minor, minuscule controllers of our own nature by Krishna's help. So this is how one can find freedom. And everyone in this world is clamoring for freedom. There are demonstrations every day somewhere in the world, people clamoring for freedom. And mostly what little freedom they have is often by dint of that demonstration, even that's taken away. And they're thrown into a clink, or they're shot and killed, and, or the government will create more restrictions to prevent even the demonstrations, even the quest for freedom. And but what the leaders of governments don't know is that they also are imprisoned. They also have no freedom. And therefore we're living in a world of blind leading the blind, where nobody has freedom, everyone is looking for freedom, and everyone is exploiting one another in one way or the other to try to find that freedom. And that freedom is the freedom to enjoy. And we are in this world, which is in itself a prison house, because of this propensity to want to enjoy and to control. Out of enviousness of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we are given the schoolhouse of the material world in order to experience the frustration and learn the lesson that we're not the controllers and we're not the enjoyers. And hopefully, if we can be very, very fortunate, have the contact of the pure devotee, or those who represent the pure devotee, then we can begin that gradual process of finding real freedom. And that real freedom brings real happiness. And that real happiness is what everybody is searching for in this world. So in 1970, after staying in San Francisco, then living for a year on a sailboat, and practicing this chanting on my own, I was still too independent, and I had to do everything on my own. So I was chanting. Then I joined the Merchant Marines. I went out to sea for 1.5 years. And there I was chanting even more. And I would say that among the happiest memories I have in this life are working as a sailor in the Merchant Marines and volunteering to stand watch in the bow of the ship. And interestingly, that although I love to chant the Maha Mantra, more than that, I enjoyed chanting the name of Govinda. And I would just repeat day in and day out the name of Govinda, 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 Govinda. And I would also write. I learned calligraphy, and I would write in this very elaborate script over and over and over, many hundreds of pages of Govinda, Govinda, Govinda. So I did this while I was on this ship. But while I was standing watch, I could shout at the top of my lungs, because it was just me and this vast horizon in front of me, and it would be between midnight and 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'd just be standing out of the bow of the ship chanting, Govinda, 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 Govinda. And I remember one time that I had some wonderful insights. I was working on this large tanker, like a 600-foot tanker, and several of the shipmates who had the qualifications, I believe they were engineers, they were down in the hold of the ship where there was lack of oxygen, so they were having to wear an oxygen mask. And then up on the top, on the deck of the ship, those of us who were working on deck would take turns turning this compressor by hand in order to provide oxygen to the person down below. And we would do it for about 15 minutes, and then the arm would get tired and somebody else would take over. And there were probably a dozen of us who were taking turns. And so it was my turn, and I was chanting as I was turning, Govinda, 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 Govinda. And I was thinking that Govinda is sustaining the life of this person down below. And then I realized that Govinda is not only sustaining his life, but he's sustaining everyone's life. And then, after 15 minutes, the next person came to take over, and I said, no, that's okay. I'll do your shit. And I kept on saying, Govinda, Govinda. Then the next person came, and I said, no, that's okay. I'll take your shit. And I think I went on for a couple of hours until he came up, until he was finished, because the name Govinda is so sweet that one can become attached to the holy name of Krishna, and one's progress, even though a fallen, very deeply conditioned soul like me, who you think would have no hope, has hope because of some attachment to the holy name of Govinda, or the holy name of Krishna. So then, when I got off the ship, I decided, so my ship was mostly in the South Pacific, but then I transferred to a ship up in off the coast of Alaska. And in between the ships, I was in Seattle. While I was in Seattle, staying in a hotel, I visited, well, before I visited, I actually noticed that there were devotees in Seattle. And I was so thrilled. Oh, and a little interesting factor is that while I was on the ship, I had a roommate, and he had a Bible. Now, I grew up in a church, but I never took it very seriously. And we had Bible classes when I was young in Sunday school. So I was a little familiar. I was familiar with the Bible. I hadn't really studied it on my own, but the Bible was there. And I thought, let me look through the Bible. It was the first time as an adult I had really looked at the Bible. And I was going through the Bible, and the only thing that really attracted me to the Bible were the discussions of the conversations between Jesus and his disciples, and his direct instructions to his disciples. So I was reading this, and I was actually quite fascinated to think about Jesus and think about the time in which he taught, and the challenge that he had to teach about devotion to God and service to God in an environment which was very materialistic and very anti, theology at the time. I mean, this is the time when the religions of the day had become so materialistic and so degraded, and the whole essence of religion had been lost. So when I got off the ship, I was in Seattle. When I got off the first ship, I was in Seattle for about a month and a half. And So I was walking down the street of Seattle and I saw the devotees. And I immediately recognized them because of my experience down in San Francisco. They were wearing their robe, all the devotees were with robes, and the ladies were with saris and then with dhotis and kurtas. And I was so excited. And the first thing that came to mind was, these remind me of the disciples of Jesus. These remind me of the followers of Jesus. And I thought, these are the true disciples. And I was really taken. And I immediately just wanted to run over and greet them, but I was a little timid. So the first day I was just watching from across the street. They were having kirtan, and one of the devotees was distributing Bhagavad-gita magazines. And then the next day I saw them there again. This time I went across the street, and I went from behind. I didn't really want to be noticed, but I went behind them where the kirtan is, standalone kirtan group, and I just kind of stood behind them and I started chanting. But they didn't notice me. They just kind of, that encouraged me. And then when the kirtan was over, I was invited to come and visit the temple. And I was invited by this particular devotee who had been handing out Bhakti-Godhead magazines. And there's a tie-in between this devotee and this class, and I'll come to that, where he's the one who invited me to come. So I got in the van and went to the temple, and then he took me in the temple, and he personally, this same devotee who I had been watching distribute the Bhakti-Godhead and made me think about the disciples of Jesus, he gave me a tour. Now, I have a background in the arts. I own an art gallery. I've been running art galleries for 42 years. I studied fine arts and theater in college. I have a background in theater from the time I was very young, and also in fine arts. My parents would take me to galleries and museums from an early age. I don't know, this was another sign of super soul within the heart of this devotee. He gave me a tour of the temple by taking me to every painting of the temple and explaining what's going on in that painting. From one room to another, and I think there were at least a dozen original paintings in that temple that had been painted by the devotees. And he was bringing me into Krishna consciousness through something that I already had a great interest in. It was pretty amazing. And then, so I started regularly, visiting the temple. But it was a 5-mile walk from the hotel to the temple. It was 5 miles. But I would walk that on several occasions. And the first time I made that walk, I had a mission. Because they did have Bhagavad-gita then. It was the purple soft-cover Bhagavad-gita printed on Macmillan. And so the first time I went to the temple, it was a 5-mile pilgrimage. And I thought to myself, this is the most important walk in my life. And I will remember this until my last day. So this was in 1969. And we are now in 2025. And by Krishna's mercy, I'm remembering it like it was yesterday. And I remember not only that walk, but I remember my thoughts as I was walking to that temple. And I get to the temple door, and I knock on the door, and it opens, and I say, can I purchase a Bhagavad-gita? And of course, the devotee who answered the door was in ecstasy, ran in and got me a Bhagavad-gita, and I paid for it. So this was the real purpose of my going to the temple on that day, was to get my first Bhagavad-gita. So then I wanted to be close to the temple. I was going to be for quite some time waiting for the next ship to pick me up. So I looked in the newspaper and I found an apartment within a few blocks of the temple. And I moved into that little basement apartment of someone's house and stayed there for the duration of the time. At least 3 weeks I stayed there, and was then going to the temple every day. And that very, very humble devotee, who I was admiring as I was watching from across the street, and who gave me the tour, when I would go and visit the temple, oftentimes it was only him there. And all the other devotees were out preaching, or going to music festivals and distributing books, magazines. and prasadam and doing kirtan. And oftentimes I would find him there, and he would immediately engage in service. We would go to the laundromat and do laundry. We would, clean, and he was helping me. And I think he's such a wonderful, humble devotee. He was the temple president. That has such a impression on me. That wow, this is spiritual leadership. And so his name was Upendra. And he had a lot of experience before that time as Srila Prabhupada's personal servant. And so having his association just meant everything to me. And I think instilled in me a vision of what is an ideal devotee. And something that I would love that I tried to model myself after. So when it came time for me to leave, I went to the temple to bid farewell to devotees, and had become very attached by that time to all the devotees, and they all thought that I shouldn't leave, and especially Upendra. They're all gathered around on the porch, as I walked away, and Upendra, his final words to me was, "Do you really have to go?" He said, "Why don't you just stay here?" He says, "Maya is so strong." And I told him that I will come, whether it will be this temple or another temple, I don't know. But I will definitely come back to Krishna consciousness in the association of devotees, but I have an obligation, I feel that I need to fulfill that obligation. And so I turned around and I started to walk away, and I walked about 10 steps. And I stopped and I turned around to say my final goodbyes. I have a hard time telling this part without crying, so bear with me. So when I looked at him, Pendra, tears flowing, seeing me go. So I thought, this is the real thing. This is the genuine thing. That, people want to have, experience deep feelings in life. They want love. They want to love and they want to be loved. They want to experience deep emotions. But the problem is, in this material world, these emotions simply entangle us in material life, get us attached to things which cannot reciprocate with us. And therefore, we give our everything, but then nothing comes back, and then we become frustrated because the material world doesn't have anything to offer. Nothing in the material world has anything to offer. But I had a taste of what it was like to be in the presence of a devotee who had experienced the loving reciprocation with a pure devotee. And I thought, wow. So then it was just a matter of time. My days were numbered at that point. And so after that, I got on the ship and I just increased my chanting, and I was on the ship for only about 3.5 months. And I got off the ship and I thought, okay, now what? I thought, I've been with the ship now for 1.5 years. I've had enough of this. I saved every penny, and you get paid very well on these ships. I saved every penny because I was following the 4 regular principles. Everybody else in the ship was, heading off to the bars and the brothels. And I was staying on the ship working overtime, or I was going out for a japa walk. And it was really very interesting because even though I was, in a way, I think everyone was looking at me as somewhat different, but they were also, many of the shipmates would consult with me because they would see that, I had something to offer. They saw that I wasn't somehow or other as entangled, in the miseries of life, and so many of them were so miserable, so miserable. Many of them were on the ship because they were getting away, from the painful life that they had on the land. And they just wanted to get away. And of course, they bring